Welcome to Capital Insight. I'm Representative Kevin Mannix from Salem, and I'm your host for this program, which is designed to help us all develop a little more insight about what goes on in our capital city and around it, and the people who are involved in government and the community in our capital of Salem. Our guests today are two folks who are heavily involved in animal issues, animal welfare issues, and humane society related issues. They are both affiliated with the Humane Society of the Willamette Valley, and I'm speaking of Rebecca Owen Anderson and Don Meyer. Welcome to Capital Insight.
Thanks, Kevin.
I'm going to start a little bit with you, Rebecca, and ask you, I still want to call you Becky, and I'm sorry about that, but tell us a little bit about yourself as a person and how you're involved in the Humane Society.
I've always loved animals. I grew up on a small ranch, and my best friends were not humans because the nearest ones were several miles away, so I lived with my horse and dog, and we rode the hills. When I came to Salem, I became involved with the Humane Society months after I moved here, and since then have become more and more involved with the questions of what do we do with these too many animals for homes, how do we help animals that are being mistreated, and what's the future for the human and animal bond.
Now tell me, where was this ranch that you grew up on?
It's on the slopes of Mount Evans in Colorado.
Now, how did a Colorado gal end up in Oregon?
Through Wyoming, of course. I said the normal path. My husband was transferred from Wyoming to Oregon, and I was delighted to come along.
When did you get here?
7 years ago.
So in 7 years, you've become a major player on the political stage in regard to Humane Society issues in the legislature. Now, I said that, you didn't.
And a big stage it is, too. Well, the Humane Society has been really generous in allowing me to put some of my passion to work, and it's given me an opportunity to get in there and really try to make some of the legislative changes that are necessary to improve the lot of animals in the state of Oregon.
I've got to catch you here, though. You're a very articulate and I think apparently well-educated person. Tell us, I mean, you speak so well of yourself and the issues. Where did you go to school?
Oregon State University. I majored in mathematics, and I went back as an older student and graduated in 1989.
So you're also someone who can be a spokesperson for our state system of higher education.
It did very well by me.
Now that all occurred after you'd come to Oregon?
Yes.
And was there anything at the time in terms of your educational program that led you to think that you would become an advocate in the community for protecting animals?
No, but I've always found it difficult to stand on the sidelines when people or issues or animals, for instance, are in need of help.
Well, as you work with the Humane Society now, what do you see as your primary mission as a person?
I see it at several levels. At one level, I see the need for me to continue to volunteer on a rather ordinary basis, working directly with animals. I see the need for dedicated board members to think about the future of the Humane Society in the Salem area. And I see the need for, it wouldn't necessarily have to be me, but somebody to pull the disparate groups together who represent animal interests to form an articulate, a good policy about how the Salem area will handle the lives of the animals that are in its care.
Okay, a well-stated personal mission in this area. And that brings me to someone else who definitely has a personal mission. Don, tell us about your background. Where are you from?
Originally I'm from California, but I've lived in the Salem area for 12 years. My background is landscaping and sales, and also with nonprofit management. I was an executive director with the March of Dimes. I worked here in Salem, I worked in Portland, and I managed 6 offices in Texas for the March of Dimes. And I've been with the Humane Society for 3 years.
So you've been pretty comfortable with what I'll call community action kinds of organizations in terms of your career development.
It's one of the things I really love about working in nonprofit organizations is it gives us an opportunity to be a catalyst and to promote change within the community to make our area a better place, not only for the people that live here, but also for the animals.
Can you tell me a little bit about the Humane Society? I mean, we read about it in the paper, you hear about it in the news from time to time. What role does a humane society play in the Mid-Willamette Valley?
Plays a very large role. We're the only animal shelter in the Mid-Willamette Valley. We service mainly Marion and Polk County, and we have a multifaceted approach of caring for animals. Our primary purpose, of course, is running an animal shelter, and we're open 7 days a week. We're there 365 days a year as a safe harbor to care for animals. We also have the strongest humane education program in the state. We have 2 wonderful humane educators that are working out in the schools, and last year they reached more than 14,000 students in our area.
When you say working in the schools, they actually go in to make presentations to the students in the classroom?
That's correct. We have a very diverse curriculum from K through 12, and we also have some adult education programs. And we have the wonderful support of Homer Kearns and his staff at 24J, and it's a wonderful program.
Referencing, of course, School District 24J and the Salem
Correct, in
Kaiser
Salem.
School District. I'm curious then, in terms of direction, do you see a part of your role being prevention by helping people become more sensitive to the need to protect animals in our midst?
That's a great insight, Kevin, and prevention is the name of the game, and trying to influence people at an early age to be responsible pet owners, to alter their animals, to have them spayed and neutered, to make sure that they have food and water, complete veterinarian care. And we know that when we're doing a great job with the kids, because we give them a lot of literature and they bring it home and they talk about care of the animals that they have in their home now, but they also come out to the shelter and adopt animals from us. So it's a real positive program.
As the Mid-Willamette Valley becomes more urbanized, and granted we're all working to control that urbanization and maintain a lot of the rural flavor in our area, are you finding that there's some shift in the issues that arise in regard to pet population and all of that? Is there more focus on prevention in terms of overpopulation, that sort of thing?
You would think as the population increases, the pet population would increase too. And we don't know exactly how many dogs and cats are in Marion and Polk County, but over the last 10 years, we've seen a decrease of about 33% of the animals coming into our shelter. So we hope that our educational message has been a main part of that. So people are getting their animals spayed and neutered, they're preventing the whoops breeding, they're adopting animals.
Excuse me, what was this breeding?
Whoops breeding.
Okay.
Whoops.
All right.
Whoops. Whoops.
Your dog and cat just roams freely, and you have litter after litter of kittens and puppies, and you reach a saturation point in the community after a while. So we've seen a decrease in the animals that are coming to the shelter, while we've seen an increase of our adoptions. This year we'll adopt more than 2,000 animals out in our community.
Now your role is I'll call it a professional role as executive director, and in a few moments we'll be talking about fundraising and what you're doing with the capital campaign, but you're the full-time professional as the executive director.
We have many full-time professionals. I'm the executive director. Everything stops at my desk, but we're real fortunate to have a very dedicated staff of 23 wonderful professionals that work in animal care. We have an animal cruelty investigation program. I mentioned our humane education program, our adoption program, and then we're out in the community. We mail more than 150,000 pieces of mail a year through our Brief Pause newsletter. We're involved in the community with the Salem Downtown Association, with the Chamber of Commerce, and I'm real fortunate to be the director because I help manage the organization and direct, and then give our people the support so they can do a real good job.
What I was using as the professional person who is full-time paid in this room, I was about to shift to Rebecca as an example of more of the volunteer kind of person who supports your organization. I assume that you're one of many people who work with Humane Society on a volunteer basis?
There are hundreds, I believe, that are more or less active in the organization as volunteers, and people bring amazing talents to us. And we have a woman who has a gift of photography, so she takes the pictures so that the animals look their very best in the paper. We have people who do everything from putting our Brief Pause mailing together to those that help us make videos.
So when you combine all that, you have an organization that's active in the community, but you're also politically active, which brings me around to the Capitol and the legislature. You had, I'll call it an agenda to deal with animal issues in our society. And how did that come about? And maybe, Rebecca, you could give us some idea on how your activism developed with that.
The humane societies across the state have long had some deep felt interest that there needed to be some changes made in Oregon statutes about the way animals are cared for and kept in Oregon. And it seemed that the Humane Society of the Willamette Valley, because we were located in Salem, was an ideal focus for it. So the board of directors asked if I would be interested in becoming a board member that was involved with the political work and with the Oregon Animal Welfare Alliance, which is the statewide organization. We put together sort of a political package for this year. But before we did that, we consulted for a long time with people and veterinarians, people who are professional dog breeders, people who are involved in judging cat shows, and other community people to try to make legislation that not only made sense to us, but it would also be workable and would be able to fit into the community.
And not to be too pithy about it, but the point is it's not just walking into the legislature and saying let's love all animals and let's have a lot of warm and fuzzy feelings about what we're doing, but trying to reach out and work with professionals in the community who understand the various issues that interrelate when we're dealing with, I call it animal welfare, but it's also human welfare, the interrelationship that we have. Have you found it a challenge to work with politicians, legislators, in trying to deliver a message?
Yes. For one thing, I've discovered that the Capitol has its own sort of way of doing things. And some of the time you need to spend just learning the rules before you can even start getting the message across. But by and large, I found most legislators from both urban and rural areas, conservative and liberal, have been receptive to the message that animals need to be well cared for. Not just because they are animals, but as you say, because it's a human question, because having anything mistreated makes all of us suffer in a manner. So I think I have a lot of people who I've got to send waves of gratitude to.
Well, Don Myers, you've been involved too. I've seen you over at the Capitol a lot. Do you supplement the efforts of Rebecca Owen Anderson in this, or do you end up being an operative on your own, or do you work together as a team?
Usually I do what Rebecca tells me to do, and it works out just fine. No, I do what she tells me, of course, but I'm there to assist. Wednesdays is my day. We have a tag team lobbyist through the Oregon Animal Welfare Alliance, and I'm there to testify because I'm at the front lines. I operate an animal shelter, and I know what pet overpopulation means, and I know what it takes to be a catalyst in a community and work with your veterinary association and to work with your dog control agency and to work with your police department and to really combine your resources to do the best that you can for caring for animals.
I'm going to pause for a moment and mention to our audience that you're with us on Capitol Insight. I'm State Representative Kevin Mannix from Salem, and I'm your host. At any time, if you'd like to write with your comments, questions, or concerns, feel free to write to me at Capitol Insight, H395, State Capitol, Salem, Oregon, 97310. And I'll mention again that our guests are Don Myers, Executive Director of the Humane Society of the Willamette Valley, and Rebecca Owen Anderson, who is on the Board of Directors of the Humane Society and is one of the primary activists and lobbyists on behalf of animal welfare issues. And I'm still glad that you're here.
We're still glad to be here.
Now, we were talking about the political process, and Don, was this your first time getting involved with the Humane Society and working with the legislature, or had you been involved at all before?
I was involved with the March of Dimes, working with some legislation in Texas and also here in Oregon. And one thing about working with the Oregon Animal Welfare Alliance and the different humane societies, we're not duplicated in our services. So we are the grassroots organization, and we're there representing, in our case, 10,000 donors, but also 11,000 animals that come into our shelter. So we've had experience in the past with this, and trying to build consensus and to have a win-win situation for all of the players involved takes some time and it takes some effort. And with the busy agenda of the legislature, sometimes it was a little difficult to keep our agenda or our bills up in front of the committees.
Well, that raises the question to you. You don't just walk in and say, gee, this is a wonderful bill, let's go do it. I assume there's a lot of spade work that has to be done ahead of time to get things built up.
Yes, that's right. And of course, there's a driving force behind this. In 1991, shelters reported that they had killed about 80,000 animals. These are companion animals. And every time our attention flags or we think that maybe it's too difficult to get these groups to agree, we remember that this is a life and death question for so many animals. And there are many good people on different sides of the fence who've got a different idea of how the solution should be approached. And I think that's one of the most difficult parts. I'm sure you've discovered solving problems with child welfare, or how do we do a tax system. There appear to be many paths, but we need people like Don to come in and say, no, this is the way it actually works. This is how the face of the problem is off of paper and in terms of animals.
Well, pet overpopulation is what we're alluding to here, which is an issue that needs to be addressed more directly by the legislature, and that's something we hope will happen in the future. As we deal with that, could it be said that perhaps some of the success of the Humane Society and other shelters has caused some of the public to lose sight of the problem? That is, instead of seeing all these animals running at large, unfortunately they're turned into the shelters, and if no homes are found for them, they are destroyed, meaning killed.
That's right.
And in a way, are you victims of your own success in dealing with that part of it? And now we need to convince folks that it's not pleasant to have to destroy these unwanted animals, that you would rather see people controlling the pet population issue in the first place?
It brings back up a question that you said earlier. Was the Marion Polk area, the Salem area, experiencing changes in the way that they had animals because of the larger population? And I think that's right. As we become more dense, animals that are not well taken care of, or are misbehaving, or are running at large, or breeding indiscriminately, are more easily noticed by the neighbors. So although we've managed to take some of the problem out of their sight and away down Turner Road where they don't need to think of it, I still think that enough people see the pressure of overpopulation in their neighborhoods that they're still pretty keenly aware of what happens out at the shelter. But I don't know, Don, maybe you'd like to speak to it.
Well, pet overpopulation is, of course, just not a problem in Salem. Nationally, it's estimated that 8 to 10 million surplus companion animals are euthanized every year. They give them a shot of sodium pentobarbital, just like we do at our shelter. Rebecca mentioned out of the 116,000 animals that are received in Oregon, humane societies and county and city animal control facilities, 80,000 are euthanized. Here in Salem, when we service Marion and Polk County, we receive a little more than 11,000 animals every year. We're open 7 days a week to adopt them. We have ads in every single newspaper. We're at every single community event trying to promote good, loving homes for these animals, and we still kill 8,500, which is 67 tons of dead animals every year. It's pathetic.
Now, as we try to address this issue, and it's something that will have to be apparently on the agenda for the 95 legislative session, since the legislation didn't make it through this past session, and the vagaries of the political process are that any one committee chair who's not interested in an issue can kill a bill. I can say that. I've seen it happen, and that's what we're talking about here. But we did have some legislation to address this. Are we going to go forward next session with some additional legislation?
Oh, you bet.
Absolutely.
And we want to thank you, Kevin, for your support that you've given us. The bill that we had this session, we made some changes so that all of the groups impacted would have a real positive feeling about it. This bill is ready to go for the next session. We'll have other things that address other animal issues. The problem has many facets. The bill, House Bill 2354, said that if you were part of the solution to the problem, a releasing agency like a Humane Society or a county pound or a rescue organization, that when you adopted an animal, you asked the people to leave behind a spay or neuter deposit so that they would see to it that their animals didn't contribute further to the problem. I think that legislation will be back in pretty close to its original, this form. Don't you think?
Absolutely, and if we can't have a standard within our own industry, meaning the animal control facilities and humane societies throughout the state, how can we go to the public and keep preaching spay and neuter, spay and neuter, spay and neuter when some of our colleagues in our own industry won't do that? And we have a strong network that we can help these different agencies set up a winning program. Out of our shelter in Salem, 98% of the animals that are adopted to our shelter are spayed and neutered. And there's several ways to work through that process. And we have a wonderful relationship with the Marion Polk Veterinary Association, and they give us a discounted rate on altering animals. And we also do a lot of phone follow-up to make sure the critters are altered.
I'm going to pause for a moment and mention to our audience that you're with us on Capital Insight. I'm State Representative Kevin Mannix, your host. If you ever have any questions, comments, or concerns, feel free to write to me at Capital Insight, H395, State Capitol, Salem, Oregon, 97310. And just before I made that announcement, Rebecca was about to say something.
I was going to say that, you know, solving the pet overpopulation problem makes fiscal sense too. This isn't just a warm and fuzzy issue. Counties and cities spend a lot of money to deal with dogs running at large and to run their animal shelters. A study in Wisconsin showed that for every dollar spent on solving the pet overpopulation problem, counties and cities saved $18 in animal control costs. And dealing with 116,000 animals is an expensive proposition. I believe that the legislature likes to look at dollars and cents for their solutions, and I think this is a motivating factor.
Now, in terms of I'll call it the pet overpopulation bill, which was really a spay or neuter option bill, because folks could opt to just forego the deposit and not have the spaying or neutering performed. As we look at that, we can put it in a little bit of perspective if you remember that in 1989, during that session, we had a bill to deal with pet theft. I know because I carried it in the House. I was not the sponsor, but I was the floor manager, and the bill passed the House but died in the Senate. I sponsored that bill in a 1991 session, and you learn by running through the traces and you find out what the problems are, what the opposition is. We got that bill through, and I won't detail it because it's not really a part of our story here today, but it took the second session around to win enough people over to say this is a good law and let's get it done, and it did pass in the 91 session. Parallel story was in the 91 session, I filed a bill on behalf of assistance animals to provide their owners and users with extra protections on the civil law and criminal law against some people who actually intentionally assault these animals. And again, I won't detail the bill, but it was a good bill. But it didn't go very far in the 91 session. And so I looked for what was the opposition, what were the problems. And just this past July, that bill was signed into law by Governor Roberts. So it took a second session. And I'm mentioning this to say in context, now our pet overpopulation spay or neuter bill had its first run through in 93. Mm-hmm. So my challenge working with you in 95 would be to bring it back. We know where some of the problem areas are, and I will say it bluntly, I know where the opposition lies. I don't think it's a very well-educated opposition. I think it's more of a knee-jerk opposition. And yes, I said that. I could say what I want about these things. But there's some hope then that working with a variety of well-meaning groups, we can reach the necessary compromises and adjustments to get a bill through. And I guess that'll be part of our challenge for 95. But with that little speech, which I don't normally make on this show, but I sort of had to get it out, that's not the only part of your agenda in terms of trying to deal with these issues. Are there some other things you'd like to talk about? I'll start with you, Rebecca, about what we're trying to do to work for animal welfare in our society, not just purely on the political agenda side.
Well, but still on the political agenda side, we were successful in passing a bill to enable peace officers to water a beleaguered animal that was in danger of death. And that was very exciting. That passed out of the Senate and was concurred with by the House.
I guess the point there is that you have to allow the officer the authority to enter the premises, even though there may not be a crime occurring at the time, in order to intervene. Was that the idea there?
Yes, the idea was to say that it would not be something that could be done at any occasion, but only in the case of an animal dying, and because they used the term of art exigent circumstances, it meant that if an officer were to use this for other than the purposes it was intended, they would not gain any benefit. But there were other animal issues that we feel that we need to address. The problem with horses without shelter, standing in mud up to their hocks and living long lives of in filthy enclosures was one of the issues that we chose to address this session, and ran into exactly the same problem that we did with the spay and neuter bill, and exactly the same opposition. And I think,
well, we'll have to deal with that next year.
exactly the same opposition. It was very frustrating. And Another issue that we're personally grappling with, the Humane Society of the Willamette Valley is grappling with this week, is when we take particularly large animals, but small animals too, out of a cruelty situation, we often have to hold them for many, many, many months, and we don't always know what their outcome will be. And for small counties and small humane societies, the cost of care can be so exorbitant that they cannot make the choice of saving the animal if they need to hold them as a criminal.
So are you looking to the notion that perhaps you would need legislation that would say that in a situation where you've had to bring in an animal that's been cruelly treated, granted we want to treat the animal humanely, but also if it was just a stray, we would at some point say if we can't find someone to adopt it, we would euthanize it, a mercy killing, putting the animal to sleep, so to speak, that there ought to be some provision in the criminal code that would allow you to document the condition of the animal, and then to avoid having to house it much longer than you would the typical stray, that at some point you'd be able to euthanize it?
Not just euthanize it, also maybe find it a better home. We can't even find them a better home, and in the case that we're dealing with this week, we've had nine stallions for...
We have $25,000 invested in their care in the last 16 months, and we respond to 400 to 500 animal abuse and cruelty cases just in Marion and Polk County. And our goal is to educate people. Why is your dog tied up to a tree with no food or water? Why is it living in mud? Why are your cattle not being fed? Why are your horses not being fed? And we give them, thousands of pounds of food and dog houses and educational materials. So the ones that we're prosecuting are problems that cannot be resolved, and criminal prosecution is a must. We need to do something with the animals, find them another home, or possibly euthanize them, and not wait 15 months, 18 months.
Well, it sounds like one I'll have to work with you on for next session.
We would love it.
We'd love it, but I think there are other issues that we are looking forward to the future in the community that aren't just legislative, and I think that
Yeah, we want to talk about your capital campaign, and we only have 2 minutes.
Oh my
left, so
God.
give me your pitch.
Okay. The Humane Society is launching a capital campaign, and actually we launched it back in March. We will build a 20,000 square foot animal resource center on our property on Turner Road. We own that 9 acres free and clear. We hired the architecture firm of Karkin, Arbuckle, and Costick. We already have a real good working plan, and we're closing in on $1 million already received for our new building.
$1 million in contributions and pledges?
Contributions, and also some monies from some wills and bequests. We need $1.6 million, and it's going to be a wonderful facility. We'll be able to increase our kennel space by at least 35%. We talked about education earlier, and that's the key, is to educate more people about responsible pet ownership and the intrinsic value of animals, the human-animal bond. Well, we'll have a 1,000 square foot auditorium that we'll be able to use. We'll have an examination area that's 3 times the size of our cramped quarters now. I have 3 employees sharing a desk in an office, which isn't really conducive for a professional staff. So we're very excited about it. It's going to launch a whole new era for the Humane Society.
Where should someone contact you if they want to help?
You should call me at 585-5900, and we have giving opportunities from $50. You can buy a brick with your name or your grandchild's name or a pet's name, all the way to $100,000 if you'd like to buy in a wing of the building.
And the idea of this whole campaign then is to give you that basic structure that you need to physically house all the programs that we've been alluding to and talking about in this program today.
That's right. That's right.
And what was that phone number again?
It's 585-5900.
And when do you think that this project will be complete, assuming you can get that other $600,000 in pledges and contributions?
We hope to break ground in May of 1994, and it'll take about 10 months to construct a new building.
Well, on that very positive note, I'd like to thank you, Don Myers and Rebecca Owen Anderson, for joining us today on Capital Insight. And I'd like to thank our audience, the folks out there who help keep politics going through your participation. I'm Representative Kevin Mannix, your host, and thank you again for joining us.